Welcome back, everybody. I want to talk to you today about the UMG widget system and how to set up a basic button inside of Unreal. So we're going to start by creating a few items inside of our content browser. I'm going to go to my framework page and I'm going to add a new blueprint class, and we're going to search under all classes for HUD. So the HUD is the heads-up display, and we can use this inside of Unreal to help organize anything that would go onto the screen for the player. You can even see the icon for it shows things on the screen. To utilize the HUD effectively, we're going to go to our game mode and we're going to set the default HUD class to our HUD class. With that being done, now every time we start, we should get our HUD information being put on there. So I'm going to open this up and just have it in the background while we go and create our other widget blueprint. I have another folder I created called UI. You can put these wherever you want, but for organizational purposes, I definitely suggest keeping all of your widget blueprints in the same place. I'm going to right click, and under user interface in the content browser, I'm going to come down to widget blueprint. The slate systems or the slate blue items are for a different type of user interface design, but we're going to work with widgets right now. And at the very top, I'm going to choose user widget, and we're going to name that WBP underscore game button, something like that. So I'm going to open that up, and you'll notice that the interface is a little different than what you may be used to in some of the other assets. So when I'm under a widget blueprint asset, I have a palette on the left, a hierarchy, and I have my designer and graph tabs over here. This designer canvas over here is going to show me where the layout of my items are. And then in the graph panel, you'll see it says widget blueprint. This is a blueprint panel that has the details panel on the left and it has my blueprints on the left as well. So this looks more like a traditional blueprint, but it's attached to this widget that we're going to make. For anything to exist inside of a widget blueprint, you need to have some sort of panel for it. The default panel that we're going to add to this is a canvas. So to get something onto your layout here, we're either going to click and drag it onto the grid or into the hierarchy. Both work and they produce the same results. If you drag it onto the layout, then your canvas is going to show you what whatever it's supposed to in the context of where you release the button. If you click and drag it down here, wherever it falls in the hierarchy is going to be where it's added to the world. So we have our canvas panel. As we select it, you'll notice there's certain things we can check, visibility not being the least of which, and then we have a couple other items for navigation in terms of if someone presses up, down, left, or right, where does this thing sit within the order? If I go up, where does it go to in the next item that's available? There's a number of items that you can create inside here. We have text boxes, spinner boxes, you have audio items that you can add into the interface, lists if you wanted to capture input. We have things that you can demonstrate content at a scaling expandable option, and then you have places for doing optimization checks inside of your widget blueprints. And then we also have other kinds of effects that you could add in for more conventional representations of systems, like blurring out the background while you pause a game and things like that. And you can create your own widget blueprints that have their own functionality and nest them, and you can call those widget blueprint classes as an item inside of another widget blueprint. For example, making a button class and then pulling a button into a list of buttons for a larger menu. With our canvas set, one of the more common things that we're going to be interacting with often is going to be a button. So I'm going to click and drag a button somewhere on the screen, and we're just going to drop that off, and they'll see a few different things that popped up. Over here we have the anchors that affect the scaling of the object as the screen changes position and size. And then we also have the handles for the object itself to determine how large and small it is. You notice if I move these handles, that the numbers on the side move over here. The position XY is in relationship to the top left of this object. And then the other numbers for the size XY are in relationship to how wide across and how wide down the object is. You notice as I go down, then it'll go into a more positive number. So this is a Y positive is down and Y negative is up, and X positive is right and X negative is left. If you're familiar with UI, then this is a fairly standard convention for you to be interacting with. Basically, looking at the top corner of the screen is our origin point, and then working into the positive down and to the right from there. For the anchor points, I can move these edges independently. So if I wanted to, I could have it centered. I could pull it apart to say, like, I always want it to be horizontally within these bounds on the screen, or I could say that I want the corners to always be here so that the percentage of screen that this object takes up is always going to be the same. And we have some options for organizing the anchors through some conventional representation in relationship to the center of the screen, or if I just want it to match full screen, it'll scale with the screen perfectly, or I can just put it with the object. Down here we can say use Control and Shift to update the position or alignment. So if I do this, then I can move the whole thing. and get it to where I want to be if I hold down Control and Shift. So as that works, that's how you set up a button. And then, of course, you have different options for designing the button, a number of configurable elements that you're going to want to see when I click on compile. We normally want to be able to click compile on a blueprint to be able to see what variables we can set. But for this to be able to treat it that way, what I have to do is come up here to the top corner and say is variable, because you may have a visual only element that you don't want to be considered for script purposes. And when I click is variable, you'll notice down here I have a number of events that just populated. So I can do on clicked, on pressed, on released, on hovered, on unhovered, and do different functions for that. Before I get into that too far, we're going to step over to the graph a little bit. All right. And so in the graph, we have our event pre-construct, event construct, and event tick. Generally for UI elements, if you're not measuring something that's a persistent piece of data for the player, tick is not a good place to do that. So there's a few different ways that you can bind objects inside of widget blueprints, and we'll get into that in a later video. But right now, just know that these functions are available to you, where event pre-construct is the setup for the blueprint, and event construct is considered the equivalent of like a begin play. So when we want to establish all the pieces and parts, put them on screen, hide them, shift them around, we can do that here, and then event construct is going to be where we're going to launch that stuff off. So in the graph, we'll see over here, I now have button 14 shows up as an object. When I come back over to my designer, button 14 is the button I created. I'm going to press F2 to rename that. We're going to call this BTN main. And then I'm going to come over to my graph, and you can see BTN main is the object I have here. So if I want to get that button, I can have that listed here, or if I select the button, I get the same events down here as were available over here. So if I click on clicked, it'll create that function for me. And now when I click over here, you can see that function already exists, and it'll just draw my camera to it. And so this will allow me to do something when the button is clicked. So let's pull off of here and say print string. And print string hello will be our default to test to make sure that things are working. Right now, this is not going to do anything because our widget blueprint, like any other class inside of Unreal, just exists. It isn't doing anything because I haven't added it to the world. And because it isn't a physical object, I can't simply click and drag it into the viewport of my level to say, hey, put this widget on the player's screen, because the player's screen doesn't exist at design time. So what I can do is go over to my HUD, and in its event graph, under event begin play, I'm going to create and add that widget to the player screen. So to add a widget into an editable space, I'm going to say create widget, and it'll say construct none is the name of the node until I select the appropriate class. And I named mine WBP underscore, so I should be able to find that pretty quickly. And it's going to be looking for our owning player. So get player controller. So this player controller I'm going to end up using a lot. So we'll reference this when you're working with user interface. Remember that the screen is where you're going to be, or the player controller is going to be where you're managing the screen and the input. So you're probably going to be referencing this a lot. So sometimes you might want to design certain things in the player controller, and then of course sometimes you just reference it. As we go here, when you create a widget blueprint or any type of on-screen element, you want to make sure that you capture that information somewhere, either by adding it to an array or by promoting it to a variable. So here I'm going to do WBP game button ref. All right, and so as I have this reference, this object is now going to be able to be called later to add it, delete it, change its visibility, have separate interactions or animations played on it. With that set up, I now need to add it to the player's screen. So I have two options. We can say add to, and you'll see viewport and player screen. These look very similar on most single player games, but if you have some picture-in-picture or split view system, or if you have a multiplayer game that's on the same system, then you'll find that the viewport and player screen distinctions become very important. So just make sure you're playtesting with that and you remember that both of them exist. So we're going to add to player screen by our setting right now. And the idea is that this is now a widget that has been placed on the screen with whatever its default visibility is. We have that set up here. Its default visibility is visible, which means this thing should show up on screen. So if I click play, there's my giant button in the middle of the screen. Now you see I still have to click into the game to get it to move around, and I'm still able to move around, but I can fix that if I'm on a menu system. For example, if this is the main menu, all I have to do is change the input mode to UI only, and our in focus is going to be the widget that we created. And we should be able to now play. and I have my mouse by default. Let's see. Expensive player controller. There we go. So I did not get the player controller. I told you we'd be using this one a lot. So I'll get the player controller up here, and now we'll try that again. All right, so now I have my mouse, but you'll notice that the mouse, once I click in the world, the mouse is hidden, but you can tell that the mouse position is still working because the hover over behavior of the default button is still working until I click. To fix that, I can just go show mouse cursor, and we'll set that to true. And now, even when I click in, I'm basically in a menu state at this point. So it's saying hello over here on the side every time I click the button, so I know that my functionality is hooked up. A few things to look out with this is I would like to add text to this. A very common mistake that early designers make is they come down to the canvas panel and they add a text block, and it gets added here, and we'll change the text to something like resume, and then we're just gonna click and drag that over here like that, and we're going to come down to our font and change the size of it so it's an appropriate size, and we're going to center that inside of the text. And I just want to get my alignment here as well. Probably wanted to align that within the button. So if the button scales, right, then this will align as well. But this is not going to work the way that we think it is, and I'll show you why in a second here. So if I go play, if I click on the edge here, you see it says hello. And if I click right here, you'll notice it stops saying hello. I don't know if you can hear me click. But the clicking doesn't work because the resume button occupies that space. And so, or the resume text occupies that space between my cursor and the button. So in order to fix that, I need to take the text and put it inside of the button. Once I do that, you can see that coming over the word, I still am able to click and launch the action. So just be mindful of where you've nested things and how they interact. I have the button set as a variable, but I have the resume text as not a variable. If I wanted to have the button as its own class that I could then use somewhere else, I might want to have the text as a variable and then choose the text attribute that exists here and let that be editable at the object, at the instance level, and that would allow me to have a button that could be reused. So let's add some functionality to this button that allows us to, rather than say hello, to return to the game and play. So right now we're at user interface only for game input. So let's change that to both remove the button from the screen as well as to hide the, or to re-enable the player control. So let's start off by removing the button's visibility. So I want to get the whole class here. So we're going to right click and we're going to say set visibility. So for the widget here, we're going to set visibility and we're going to choose from visible rather than hidden, we're going to choose collapsed. And so collapsed is going to allow us to hide a widget still on screen. It still has all of its information to be able to be instantly drawn back to the screen. And I don't need to recreate it every time that the player accesses a menu. For example, if you have a pause menu and you use the create widget function every time they pause the game, eventually the system might run into a hang with memory if it's not properly handling that. If you just use collapsed and change things from collapsed to visible, then you're able to keep all the same content in place without having to redraw or add to memory. So now when I click the button, it should set the visibility to collapsed. So that goes away, but now I've left the player in basically an idle state where they can't interact with the game. So I want to also set my game mode, game only, input mode to game only. And for my player controller, just gonna get player controller. And this will allow us to go from a static state to a dynamic state. Now you notice my cursor is still on screen, and you can tell what my sensitivity is because the cursor is moving differently than the character in game. So what I'd like to do is anytime I control my input mode, I also want to control the mouse statement, or mouse state. So this is where something we're going to use later, blueprint function library would be appropriate. We're going to set mouse cursor from the player controller. Set mouse. It should be. Sorry, we had this functionality just a second ago. Show mouse cursor, not set. Apologies. So show mouse, there we go. Show mouse cursor, false. And then when we go to play, if I click over here, you see the game is not interacting. When I click resume, the mouse cursor goes away and I get back to playing. So this is a very quick view at widget blueprints, how to add things to the screen, how to add some interactivity to them, and how to call that interactivity somewhere else. So just be mindful, there's a lot more to discuss with inside of widget blueprints, and we will cover them in some later videos, but hopefully this gets you started and allows you to go out there and keep building.